So our topic for today is why proficiency, what domestic immersion courses can do that AI tools cannot. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background and start this out. Um, my name is Thor Sawan, if you don't know me. I'm the Associate Dean of Curriculum for Middlebury Language Schools. I've taught in our German school for many years. And Leah, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So great to meet all of you virtually. My name is Leah Grenier Kennedy, and I am both an ACFL and an independent language consultant, and work very closely with people designing curriculum and programs at the K to 16 level. So I'm thrilled to be part of this series with Thor over the upcoming weeks and the upcoming weekends as well. So looking forward to getting to connect with all of you.
Okay. So, we have these 12 amazing languages. We've got a wide array of programs, lots of different kinds of learning opportunities. And we who've been there, we know how amazing it is. I think one of the challenges that we consistently face is convincing potential learners, prospective learners, just what kind of incredible experience they're going to be able to have with Middlebury Language Schools. And that involves really having to think a lot about what are there other opportunities out there and what sets us apart. So we know that there's a changing landscape of learners. And if we think about the main groups of people who have been coming to Middlebury Language Schools over the last 30, 50, 70 years, one group of this has been undergraduate students. And at one time, this made up the bulk of who was in our immersion programs. But this is shrinking every year, the percentage of our participants in our language programs who are undergraduate students. There's a lot of cuts to language majors, lower enrollment in language majors, changes to the language requirement that a lot of universities used to have, which results in lower enrollments. We're also seeing lower numbers of international students this year. We've had a lot of international students who stay in the United States for the summer and come to language schools during the summer, and that number is going down. We've also historically had lots of graduate students, not only in our graduate programs, but also who come to our language immersion programs. But a lot of the humanities majors, master's and PhD programs that have fed us are pausing enrollment. There's threats to the funding sources. So the number of graduate students who need to or who can afford to seek language immersion is also decreasing as a share of our learners. And overall, our numbers are slightly down this year over the past couple of years. And I think we're seeing these changes in the language learning landscape. The one group that's really growing is in-career people, so people who are professionals seeking language development, and retirees who are seeking a connection to a language either for their retirement plans, where they want to retire for family reasons or for personal reasons. So all of these learners, there's a lot of competition in our language learning marketplace. So there's increasingly sophisticated tools which incorporate AI. And I don't need to tell you that there's a lot of funding and a lot of backing behind AI initiatives. There's a lot of aggressive marketing out there. So even the learners who could really benefit from us, they see many, many, many kinds of advertisements pushing, don't go to an expensive language program, use our AI tool instead, use our online learning app. And this is something we increasingly get questions about is like, why should I come to the language schools? There's a lot of competitor programs out there that are marketing very clear, data proven and data backed gains. So, and a lot of the other programs, they have this guarantee, you come in at intermediate low, you will leave at intermediate high, in ways that learners maybe don't necessarily always know what that means, but they know that there's a lot of data behind that. Overseas programs, especially this summer, are much more affordable with the strong dollar. It's a lot cheaper to study in Japan, Korea, Brazil this year because of what's happening currency-wise. Obviously, people who come to us for grad programs, there's a lot of other grad programs out there on the market that have better research funding, but I think we have an opportunity because we offer language development to our graduate students. And most of the reason that graduate students come to us is they know they're going to be taught in the language and they can develop their language skills in a way that a lot of our competitor programs at the big public or R1 universities don't offer. So with the changing needs of our learner, we definitely know that word of mouth is our main driver. Word of mouth is really everything to the language schools. which means that our learners have to become sort of sophisticated advocates for what happens to them in the summer. They must really be equipped to explain to their friends, explain to their peers what they could do at the end of a summer at the language schools. Like that's what's going to sell people. What could you do in Arabic? What could you do in Hebrew? What could you do in Italian at the end of the summer that you couldn't do at the beginning? And to the extent that learners can articulate that, they're going to be good word of mouth drivers for us. And they also increasingly are going to be asked, why should I spend all that money when I can subscribe to the best AI tools for only $800 maybe for the month, like every possible tool? And isn't that enough right now? Why should I do that? Or these online classes that have, virtual reality classes. So the learners need to be able to really talk about and know what they've learned so that they can have this word of mouth. So we remove the temptation of English at the language schools, but I think we also have some advantages over our competitors. I know that learners can learn about the language anywhere, our kinds of grammar or metalinguistic explanations. AI can do that for them very easily now, and it's pretty accurate. AI can help them create the grammar drills and practices. They don't really need us to do that for them anymore. There's a lot of other tools that are out there. And when it comes to second language writing, there's amazing AI tools out there to help them with their writing, help them not only write, but give them important and perfectly tailored instant feedback on their writing in a way that I think they don't necessarily need at least the language help on the writing from us in the same way that they used to. But there's a few things that we have an advantage. And you see at this top, functional interpersonal proficiency. This is increasingly what learners want. It's what learners can get from us that they can't get anywhere else. They certainly can't really get in an AI chatbot. And this practical interpersonal skills, how can they practically do the language and accomplish things in the language with other people in their physical body without resorting to English or without resorting to an automated translation on the phone? They can't find as structured of an interactional environment as they can at the language schools. Every year we see students with higher levels of social anxiety, shyness, reluctance to start conversations, reluctance to use what they're learning. I think we could take this for granted maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that in the co-curriculars, students would just talk and engage. But nowadays, we really need to structure and help learners get into that place where they can engage in the interpersonal, the co-curricular activities. And the one thing is the kinds of friction that we have. Friction maxing is a trendy term for 2026. It's choosing to do things that are difficult so that you can have better outcomes and kind of get away from the technology. And we have all kinds of friction from learning together with learners that are very different from us, really diverse in our schools. So this is something that I think a focus on functions and a focus on interpersonal communication stand us in really good stead. So how, as we develop our course syllabi and as we tweak our course syllabi for the summer, should we assess learning? Should we develop learning with these proficiency targets in mind? So you can see the actual pyramid here, where novice low, the starting level, is at the bottom of the period and distinguished is at the top. In our own chart for Middlebury Language Schools, we have it flipped. Novice is actually at the top and you sort of work your way down. But at this link, and I just put it in the chat, you can see what are the advertised proficiency levels for the different levels that we offer. So for your language, for the level you teach, including for graduate, because we also promise that in our graduate courses, you will intentionally develop your language skills. What are the proficiency levels that you're supposed to be dealing with? So once we know those proficiency levels, ACTFL has some amazing tools to help us dig in and ensure that our instruction and ensure that our assessment of instruction really aligns with what's supposed to be done here. So I'm going to pass off the baton to Leah.
All right. So I'm really happy to see you setting Middlebury apart and showing all of the different benefits. And I think as I'm seeing your heads nodding, I'm seeing agreement with the changing landscape for our learners and the changing needs that we need to address as the competition continues to get greater, especially with these AI tools. So I'm excited because we are going to do both things. We're going to talk about building out functional use of language, and then also using some of the AI tools to advance our syllabus. So I think we have a nice little program put together here in this series. So we're going to start today by looking at these necessful, actful, can-do statements and think about how they can help us. I'm sure that everybody's seen these before. They were originally released back in 2017, but just a couple of weeks ago, the newly revised necessful, actful, can-do statements came out. So I just wanted to make sure that that was on our radar as a group, thinking about what are the implications for the syllabus and the course content that you're designing right now. So when I think of the can-do statements, I think about how they're a roadmap, and yes, they help me to identify what a learner does as they move up that proficiency pyramid from novice low to novice mid to novice high. So I think of it as the points on a map, the roadmap to say, well, what will I do if I'm an Arabic student that wants to move from novice low to novice mid? What are the specific strategies? It also tells me what I am capable of doing at each of those sub-levels. Now, we do have that with the Common European Framework as well, but I think that the can-do statements give us very specific strategies to move from one level up to the next level. So when we take a look at what the can-do statements are about, it's a roadmap that's taking us over hill and dale to help us think about how we can get to that elusive idea of becoming proficient in another language. So if we advance to the next slide, we're going to think about how all of these can-do statements are built upon language functions. So there's a document in the Drive that I'm going to just copy and paste into the chat right now, and it's called the key language functions. And let me just go ahead and just pop that in there for you. And basically what it is an overview of 6 big buckets, if you will. And the yellow bucket on the left is thinking about what is the function, the big idea of describing people, places, things, how, and how well. What does that look like if I have novice Arabic, novice Mandarin, novice Hebrew? What is that going to look like? Well, maybe it's going to be a description with 1 or 2 short adjectives, but I'm going to start building that function with my novice, and I'm going to continue building that function up through my advanced. If I think about the next function of asking and responding to questions, of course, at first, they can't even ask a question at novice low, but soon they'll be able to ask and answer a variety of memorized as well as follow-up questions. So you'll continue to build that function of asking and responding to questions. And then if you look at the next bucket, that third and final one on this slide, is expressing feelings and emotions. So we start doing that function as a novice, and then we'll continue to do it. So whether you're an L1 or an L2 speaker, you're going to work with all of these language functions on your journey, and then you're just going to continue to build those functions and build a higher level of accuracy with each one. So as we look at the next set of slides, there are 3 more buckets on this one: expressing advice, opinions, and preferences, expressing feelings, as well as expressing hopes, dreams, and future plans. All 3 of these are functions, and underneath each of the buckets on the 2-page document that I put into the chat, you will see that there are related verbs that go with it. So if we're thinking about describing, another way to describe could be illustrate. Another way to describe could be compare and contrast. I think of them as Bloom's taxonomy, the set of verbs that go with each of these language functions. But basically, your can-do statements are built upon this list of functions. So if we look at the new Necessful 2026 can-do statements, you will see that they're all focused on functions. So that's why I just wanted to stop before we went too far into this today and say, what is a language function? And think about what do we do across the 3 modes of communication as we build out the functions. Now, I know this is tiny, but I do want to show you that when you're looking at this big overview of the proficiency benchmarks here, you might notice that something is different here. And I'll call this out in a bit, but there's been a paradigm shift. So at the very top, you're going to see novice, intermediate, advanced. You see those benchmarks, but the pale blue, the top two rows across, are about building intercultural communicative competence. And then the purple ones down below are building out the communication. So I just want to show us that we're going to be delving a little bit more deeply into the proficiency as well as the intercultural. So there's both communication and intercultural. So we'll advance and look at the uses of the can-do statements and then come back to that. So here are some ways that you could use the revised can-do statements. All of these documents are in the drive, the tiny URL that Thor put into the chat. So one of the uses for the can-do statements is to have learners demonstrate what they can do each day and each week of their program across all of the modes of communication. It also gives them evidence of what they can do across a variety of content and context. I can do this about very highly familiar content and context. I can't do it yet about research content or context. So it allows the learner to reflect on that and have some chance to think about where they're growing. It's also that the learners have a pathway to move up each sub-level. So it gives very concrete, specific strategies. And the other uses of the revised can-do statements would be that learners develop independent learning goals, moving from familiar to abstract content. So as Thor was explained before, we have a diverse group of students that are coming each summer with differing needs. Are they in graduate, undergraduate? Are they mid-career? Are they retirees? Well, how can we help each one of those learners come and set their own independent learning goals? So the can-do statements are terrific for that. And then finally, learners can self-evaluate as they become more aware of what they can do in the interpretive mode, in the presentational mode, and in the interpersonal mode of communication. So that's a big opportunity for us to start thinking, how am I growing across each of those modes? And we'll get a little bit more into that as well. So when you look at this paradigm shift that I was sharing with you before, I wanted you to see that across the top, we're saying we have those benchmarks of novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and distinguished. But you'll note that the very top says investigation, and interaction. So in other words, we're giving them products and practices to investigate. Why? So that they can leave the program with higher levels of intercultural competence to interact with speakers of the language at a higher level. So before, if you remember the previous version of the can-do statements, the communication was at the top. And we said, well, and if you get to some intercultural, that would be nice. But the message was that it was down below, and some people did not get to that. Now, in a program like Middlebury, obviously, you're exploring products and practices to expose those perspectives to the learners throughout each week of your course curriculum syllabus. But now we're saying, how can we enter explicitly through that? And that goes for the language content, not just for the language acquisition courses, not just for the content courses. So that is definitely a paradigm shift that you will see in these new can-do statements. So if we go to the next one, you'll see that that there are at the very top, you'll see that there are no sub-levels for the intercultural can-do statements. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we have novice, intermediate, advanced. We do not have sub-levels unless we are talking about the communication can-do statements. So as you can see at the top, we're giving our learners the opportunity to look at products and practices of the cultures studied in order to use language and behavior to interact with intercultural competence. So So as we take a look at building a can-do statement, what I wanted you to see is that the essence of a can-do statement is a function. So on that next slide, you'll see that a can-do statement says, I can plus function. That's my language function. Is it, I can express preferences, I can exchange information, I can interpret, understand, analyze. The next part of my can-do statement is my content or context. That could be the theme of the unit. It could be the cultural product. It could be the cultural practice, whatever the content of that unit or that week is. And then the last part of a can-do statement is the how well. That is the text type. Am I able to produce with words, phrases, simple sentences, connected sentences, organized paragraphs? So the building of that can-do statement, the energy of that can-do statement is my function. That's the critical piece of it. So we're going to be looking at how are your courses giving students opportunities to build those functions across the weeks of study and across the various content and context. So if we take a look at our breakout rooms on the next slide here, we're going to be thinking about what role do the functions play in our courses, and what is the role of the can-do statements in our courses. I'm just going to offer a few ideas before we go into our breakout room. And it could be that you are using the can-do statements in syllabus planning. It could be in lesson planning. It could be in unit planning. It could be daily learning objectives. It could be embedded within tasks that you give to the students. So I'd love to hear how the can-do statements are coming to life in your courses right now. And then the second question is, how do the learners see their ability to grow their functions in the courses? In other words, are they stopping to reflect on, oh, I can describe people, places, things, how and how well. I can do that at the novice mid or the novice high level. Here are ways that I can do that language function in my language in whatever week of the course that I'm in. So I'm going to ask that when you go into the breakout rooms that you talk about these two questions, and maybe when we come back, if you can add any of your comments into the chat, that would be terrific, because it would be really wonderful to hear how you are currently viewing the role of functions in your courses and currently using the can-do statements in some way in your courses. So
Can I say something quick too?
yes, please.
Yeah, so if you've never looked at these in great detail before this point, I'm going to say that that's fine, but this is a real opportunity to think. Like, I know when I went back and revisited my German 1 syllabi, I kind of had, a grammatical syllabus of where I was progressing in terms of grammatical structures, a thematic syllabus, even some vocabulary, but I had never really looked at, was I ensuring that the things that we did in our course that week were really developing the functions that were spelled out for the band that I had, and as even think, what functions are at the start of the course and at the end. So it's okay if this is new or if you've never looked at this in great detail, but would love us to think about that, both so we can articulate between the levels, kind of across levels, but so that we can deliver what it is that we promise we're going to deliver in terms of proficiency gains to our students. Okay. So in terms of breakout rooms, how many breakout rooms do you think?
So if we could have maybe 3 people or so per breakout room, that would be terrific. And I see that we have new people who have joined. So welcome if you are coming in during these slides. And I'll make sure that I put the functions chart back into the chat so that everybody can see that as well. And if you can capture any notes as you're chatting with your group members, and then you can add it into the chat when we come back. Perfect. Everybody's coming back in. I just added the 2 questions into the chat. So if you could take a minute here to answer one of these questions, I think your conversations probably went in one way or the other. But I know that I got to join Ortal and Yasser, and we were talking about the role of the can-do statements in our courses. So if you could add your idea of how you're using them, that would be terrific if you are using them. And then the other question is, what role do the functions play in our courses? So I'm gonna, while other people are typing, if anybody wants to just jump in and share their idea here, and that would be terrific. I'm just reading Thor's comment here in the chat as well, that he was admitting that he had not used them last time that he taught German level 1, but it would have been helpful in order to tie the language development and the cultural courses, literature, social studies, to bring them together. So I want to be able to spend a little bit of time here because we are going to have another breakout room. So I know that the comments are going to be somewhat truncated here, but I want to make sure that we have time for us to think about what is that going to look like as we start to think about really intentionally building functions across all 3 modes in our spoken languages. I see that Casco added in that coming from different teaching traditions, developing a portfolio of what students can do could be very interesting. That's terrific. Students using the can-do statements in their final portfolios in which they submit examples of what skills they have acquired. Another great way to encourage that self-reflection about growth and what is the benefit of coming to Middlebury for the entire summer. I see that Brahim was saying that the can-do statements help the students become more conscious about specific tasks they need to complete in order to function in a context of communication. So these are some great ideas. So I'm gonna continue here just to give us a little bit of time to think about the criteria of fact. That is something that's embedded in the can-do statements, but it's now something that was originally really focused on in the 2024 proficiency guidelines published by ACFL. So if we take a look at this slide that is in front of you here, this is an analogy by one of our proficiency gurus, Chantal Thompson, out of Brigham Young University. And she has really gotten us to think about our learners as if they were trees. So let me just share this analogy with you and see how this resonates with you. But basically, each learner that comes to us each summer is like a sapling, a tree that, if it's a sapling, a very young tree, a novice low is just beginning. What we need to do is build the tree trunk and build the strength of that tree. That is the functions. So the functions are describing, expressing opinions, asking and answering questions, negotiating a survival situation. All of those are the things that we do with language, the essence of a can-do statement. She goes on to say that, yes, we're going to be able to build those functions and we need to build them across a variety of content and context. Now, we know at first it's very familiar, highly familiar content and context. And then we start to grow those root systems. And every time we have a new theme or topic and we move into family and my digital identity and technology and foods and culturally rich traditions around sharing foods around the globe, every time we add a new theme or topic, we have a new content or context. So as a storm comes in, which it seems that we had plenty of this winter, if the tree has grown in the number of functions and expands the circles of the trunk, it's stronger. If it has a variety of the root systems coming down and keeping it tethered to the ground, it will be stronger as the storm comes in. What do we need to grow next? We need to grow those branches. Well, that's the text type. So we start with novice low with our words, novice mid with our phrases. We go on to simple sentences with novice high. And then you can see we move up into sentences, paragraphs, extended discourse. So those are the branches of the tree growing. Well, as we know, the leaves of the tree come and go, just like the seasons and the leaves on the trees that we're hoping are coming in right now as we're heading into spring. And every time we have a new theme or topic, we have to develop new grammar, new vocabulary to make that tree look beautiful. So Chantal Thompson's analogy is that we need to build curriculum and we need to build instruction and assessment that really very purposefully is built upon the criteria of fact. So that is not the case if we think about traditional language programs that did not have an immersion program component. We would be focused very heavily on that A for accuracy, and then say, oh, and gosh, and what are they going to do with that accuracy? We weren't thinking about the functions. We were thinking and leading with the accuracy. And so now the proficiency guidelines released in 2024 say on the first page, please be focused on the criteria of fact: function, accuracy, content, and text type. So that's the difference in what we see in the guidelines. That is also true in the can-do statements. So you're going to see the function is what does a novice do at the novice level. The accuracy is what type of accuracy can you expect from a novice. The content is what can they communicate about. And then the text type is can they communicate in words, phrases, sentences, organized paragraphs, etc. So as we take a look at this next slide and we're thinking about building our course content for the summer, we're thinking about how do we move an Arabic level 1 student from a novice low to a novice high in 8 weeks. So what functions will they need to do? What accuracy, what content, and what text type? If we look at the next slide, we're thinking about Mandarin. Again, we have 8 weeks. How do we systematically and very intentionally move a level 1 student from a novice low to an intermediate low in 8 weeks? Or we could be looking at a French student. In 7 weeks, how are we moving them from a novice low up to an intermediate low in 7 weeks? And so that's where I'm going to say, let's take out those can-do statements. The hyperlink to that folder is what Thor put into the chat, and say, what would it look like? What strategies do I need to put in place across the 3 modes of communication? So if we take a look at the interpretive can-do statements, the functions in the interpretive mode are clearly connected with that mode. It is understand, interpret, or analyze. So as you animate in these arrows, you're going to see that there are 3 questions. The first one says, what can we understand, interpret, or analyze in informational text? Then we take the same functions, still understand, interpret, analyze, but now for a fictional text or media, and then finally in a conversation. So we're thinking about how do we build those functions over the course of the 7 or 8 week program. If we take a look at the next mode of communication, it's going to be the same organization. So I wanted you to see that the can-do statements are all built upon the functions. So if we're focusing on the presentational mode, the first way that we're going to do it is to inform and explain. Then we're going to give preference, opinion, or persuasive argument. And finally, it's to narrate about life and experience. Now, those 3 questions are the 3 functions per mode. So as I'm building my course syllabus, I'm being very purposeful about how am I going to give the students opportunities to inform and explain, to give preferences, to narrate about life and experiences. I want to make sure that I'm varying the functions, because as we saw in that analogy of the tree, we want to build out the rings, the tree trunk, because that's the strength of the learner. That's the strength of building up those proficiency levels. As we take a look at the final mode here, we are looking at interpersonal. Again, you're going to see 3 functions, 1, 2, 3, exchange information, express, react, and explain preferences, and finally meet my needs and address situations. Now, this is where Middlebury is an opportunity for learners that is going to allow them to demonstrate to themselves, I came in as a novice low, and I moved from novice low to novice mid to novice high across each of those bands. I can, through my daily lessons and my weekly lessons, be able to exchange information and build up to that novice high by the end of my 7 or 8 week time. So basically what we're thinking about is how in our classes can we get them to move from input, the interpretive mode, to output, both interpersonal and presentational, through all of our classes, so that even if it is a course that is a 2-hour course, or it is the hour-long course, whatever the layout is, because they're a little bit different by language and by level, how can students demonstrate that they moved from novice low to novice mid interpretive? They moved from novice low to novice mid presentational and interpersonal. What are we doing to make it very purposefully designed so that they will move through all 3 modes of communication and demonstrate to themselves their growth? So I think that the difference that we're seeing now is that if you advance to the next slide, you'll see that everything in the ACTFL documents is about leading with the function. So the functions have been critical to build proficiency for years. This is nothing new. But what we're trying to do is draw more attention to building proficiency using the criteria effect, starting with that function. Yes, we're going to have accuracy, but it's accuracy in the form of grammar and vocabulary to serve the function. So yes, I will know my advanced and complicated grammar charts and verb forms, but it is not so that I could be able to memorize conjugations. It is so that I can be able to do whatever function is requiring that grammar or vocabulary. So I like to think of the function as the thing that the pillars, both the vocabulary and the grammar, are holding up. So the pillars, accuracy does not go away. And that is something that, as a French and Spanish teacher, I talk to French teachers all the time. They say, well, we can't get rid of any of our grammar. We're not getting rid of our grammar. Our grammar stays, but it is in service of our function. So when you're looking at the can-do statements, if we look at the intermediate ones here, I just wanted to show you, it's the same layout. So I'm not going to do the arrows in to show you all of the functions, but you see it's 3 questions down. So it's inform and explain, give a preference, opinion, or persuasive argument, and narrate about my life. So those functions are the same, but now we're up at the intermediate level. So where would I find function, accuracy, content, and text type? It's embedded in that tiny description under the sublevel. It's the criteria. So I typed on the left what is very tiny on the right because there's no chance I could read that. So on the left, if we're thinking about a presentational can-do statement at the intermediate high, I could say I can inform and explain, for example, because I circled that box, what accuracy across various time frames, about what content and context, both familiar and research topics, and then what type of branches will I have? Am I going to be down at words, phrases, simple sentences, series of sentences? No, I will be creating short paragraphs. So that box that's highlighted with intermediate high has function, accuracy, content, and text type embedded in it. So each of the descriptors for the sublevels embodies the criteria of fact. So let me try this one more time just to see if this resonates with you. So now let's do it again for interpersonal. So I'm looking at intermediate. I have the 3 functions. So you can see at the top, exchange information and ideas. Then you can see we move on to express, react, and explain preferences and opinions. And then you can see the bottom one is meet my needs in a conversation to address situations. So you can see those 3 functions, they have not changed. What's changed are the criteria. So let's think about what is it going to look like if I am going to, in the interpersonal mode of communication, exchange information. It is going to be across various timeframes. It is going to be about familiar and research topics, and it is going to be creating short paragraphs. So you can see the criteria doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the function. So on the last slide, I gave you inform and explain. And on this slide, I was showing you exchange information. So basically, what we're trying to do is think about within the course syllabus that you're designing, how can we very explicitly give our learners opportunities to work in the interpretive mode, considering how they could read across various time frames, read and listen to familiar and research topics, and read at paragraph length, and then be able to do interpersonal communication at that same level of proficiency. So I think when I'm thinking about it from my course planning, if I go to the next slide, I'm thinking about what do I need to add in order to level up each week, and what do I need to leave behind? So if I am coming towards the end of my 7 or 8 week program and I'm leaving novice high and I'm going to be entering into intermediate low, I must leave behind words. I must leave behind phrases. I must leave behind simple sentences. I need to be at sentences all the time. So I need to add in sentences and connected sentences in order to move them up to that next level. If I am moving from novice into intermediate, I must be leaving behind some of those very familiar topics and content and context. I need to be adding in researched content and context. So I'm being very mindful of what goes behind and what needs to be added in. So it is in that way that the can-do statements, as I go through my course syllabus, I say, wait a minute, I can see here, I'm now in intermediate low and moving into intermediate mid. I must add in my research topics, but I don't have to memorize that or guess. I go back into the can-do statements and see this is where my variety of research topics comes in. So it reminds me to expand that content context, the root system, so I'm not staying in the highly familiar. So if we take a look at the next slide, I think the last idea of the for the breakout room was to get us to think clearly about where in each syllabus does each student have the intentional opportunity to practice building language functions across all 3 modes of communication. So I think Thor brings up a really good point of making it intentional. Sometimes I think we sit back and say, well, of course, they're going to be reading about this. They're going to be writing about this in different ways. They're going to be talking to their partners. But to do it systematically and intentionally through the curriculum and through the syllabus, that is not always the case. So let me turn it to you, Thor, and see if you want to do full group for this. And maybe people can add ideas into the chat, or if you wanted to go into one more breakout.
Okay, so Brahim asked a question about researched topics, and researched topics means topics that learners don't know about just innately or from their own personal experience, but something they need to conduct an interview on or listen to a podcast or do some reading in order to be able to talk about it. So learners are obviously most comfortable. It's easier to talk about something that you already know about, you're already an expert on. Our language performance changes when we are talking about a less familiar topic, a researched topic. So that's like stretching, that's actually adding more resistance to our language muscles. So what we have coming up, thank you for coming today. So on Thursday, we'll be doing a session for the people really focusing on language development syllabi. So kind of the courses like Recursos para Comunicación, or like the grammatical, like the language development classes in the different languages, looking at some nice new AI tools that kind of make that job of interrogating our syllabi and suggesting some ways to align it that have already been pre-programmed in this knowledge it lowers the barrier to doing that. And then next Tuesday on the 14th, we'll be doing that for the content syllabi. So kind of the culture, literature, media, history, social studies type courses on that. The can-do statements, there's more detailed can-do statements than kind of these overview charts that you can find examples of online. Last summer in the teacher training class that I did in the German school, I used AI to help me translate some of these can-do statements into German. The Sefer ones are already translated into the European languages, but the actual ones don't have a translation in all of them yet. So for some of the languages, if you were going to use them in the syllabi, you might want to be able to use AI to help translate, obviously revise it or look at it, what these can-do statements might be for your learners in the language that they're learning. And it would be great if on Thursday or on Tuesday, if you come, to maybe bring a syllabus for the summer, either a past one or the current one you're working on, to look at as we kind of introduce you to some of these tools and kind of guide you through the process. And then, of course, on Saturday the 11th and the 18th, we've got some opportunities to really workshop syllabi together, to ask each other questions across our language. Again, the summary functions, I think, is a great way to help us tighten our relationships between the levels and across the different courses within the level. I think that this is where our learner population is going. They really want to have the language functions, the functional proficiency, and they want to have the language to be able to talk about what they've learned. Okay, thank you so much. I'll stop the recording. If you've got any other questions, feel free to stick around and ask, needle us, and I look forward to seeing you in a future session.